What I find interesting with Beto O'Rourke is that there really is a line of demarcation, I think, even in this town and among the political world. If you're under the age of 40, you're thinking, oh, this is interesting. And if you're over the age of 40, you think, I've seen these comments before. You're not thinking Obama, you're thinking Edwards, or you're thinking Gary Hart, or, you know, depending on your age. And I'm having a Gary Hart flashback from '84. And I don't mean to go that way back, but Gary Hart's entire campaign was an idea.
Right. That's true. First of all, let me just say it was a lot of hand movement in that video.
Yes,
Trump was accurate about that. But look, I think Beto O'Rourke is a gifted politician. And I think we saw in 2018 a magnetism, an ability to connect with crowds that few people have shown. And Barack Obama is somebody who showed it. I think the question is he ultimately, in the context of running against very talented other Democrats, is he going to show the gravitas and the chops on policy when the debates start in just a couple of months to come across as a serious-minded guy? And remember also, John Hickenlooper got a lot of grief when he said, I'm going to get things done because I'm going to go sit down with Mitch McConnell and talk things out. Everybody watched through the Obama presidency and saw that that just doesn't work. That's not how Washington works right now. When Beto O'Rourke says, I'm about everyone, and Republican or Democrat, I'm going to bring us all together, that is on a same plane of unrealism, ultimately, as Hickenlooper. So can he be convincing?
Sarah, you're in Iowa, and I should remind, even though you work for a Texan, and we're talking about Beto O'Rourke, a Texan who's...
Two Texans, yeah.
Yeah. He does strike me as a very good Iowa candidate. When you think about the Iowans have this, both the Republican and the Democratic caucuses, they're a bit idealistic. They're looking for hope.
They are, and Iowa's a unique state politically because it has both polar
it does.
opposites.
It certainly you have your Steve King and all that stuff. There's some extremes.
And you have certainly a very progressive base there. But I think candidates get a lot of points, for showing up. And, I thought it was interesting that he started his tour in not only eastern Iowa, but, really southeastern Iowa.
The only candidate that basically jumped right to Iowa. That used to be a standard thing to do. You announce and went to Iowa. I believe George W. Bush did that, right?
Not many people started in Keokuk.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was an interesting move. And I think it does portend that he will wear well in Iowa as a candidate. But I agree with John. Ultimately, in a race in Texas, he was an idea. He was against Cruz. He was against Trump. He was one person, fighting David and Goliath. He's going to have some very skilled political politicians right next to him on that debate stage. And they're going to do well there, too, some of them. So I just don't know that he wears well in a cultural sense, perhaps. I don't think he wears well in a policy sense long term for the Democratic base, who does not want everybody to get along. They want to fight right now.
Barack Obama in 07 benefited greatly from, that was a highly skilled field he ran against, right? You had very smart, successful people who sort of pushed him a little bit and forced him to be a policy person. Remember, people forget, it wasn't just Hillary Clinton. You had Joe Biden, John Edwards, who was at that time, this is the pre-National Enquirer, John Edwards, Chris Dodd. Bill Richardson was the afterthought, and that was a very good, he was a pretty serious candidate. Who could make Beto O'Rourke a better candidate in this field?
I think if Biden gets in, he could make him a better candidate. And look, I think that if Obama was helped so much by that field, it made him stronger in the general election against McCain. What I'm looking for from Beto is whether or not he is able to draw clear contrasts with the other Democrats. And I don't think he did that as much as he probably should have against Ted Cruz. And this is going to be important on the debate stage. In town halls, he's fantastic. He does have policy chops. He's a smart guy. When he's on a debate stage and he only has 5 or 6 or 7 minutes to make his point, and he's still very low on the name ID scale with the party, how does he break through? Does he break through on his personality, or does he break through by drawing a contrast with his opponents?
And I think on the debate stage is where that line that he gave Garrett today, you're asking me to define myself against other people. That's not how I think. That's going to come across as a little too cute on the debate stage.
And he's going to have to do it, though.
Well, I was just going to say, I want to put up the Vanity Fair. This is an interesting way to launch. It felt very...
It seemed accidental last night.
Okay, I don't know what it's an Annie Leibovitz. There's Annie Leibovitz photo spreads are never accidents. Okay, I mean that in that sense.
The last night,
yes,
he confirmed with the local Texas state.
But let me put something up from what he said here. You can probably tell that I want to run. This is in the Vanity Fair piece. He finally confides, smiling. I do. I think I'd be good at it. I want to be in it, he says, now leaning forward. Man, I'm just born to be in it, and I want to do everything I humanly can for this country at this moment. Boy, that is like, there's the ending of that sentence, John Harwood. All right, I want to do everything I can for this country. Great. I alone can fix it was Donald Trump. I am born to do this.
Well, one of the things that Barack Obama had was a very healthy self-regard. And he had to kind of walk a line between not looking like he thought he was too cool for school.
And he sometimes crossed it, and he'd get sort of...
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm LeBron, baby. Right. You're like, whoa, dude.
And Beto O'Rourke has the same issue. He's got to be careful that he doesn't come across as too self-absorbed, too full of his own persona for this race. That's right.
I agree with that. And I think that there was a wholly different race even than Barack Obama a few years ago. I mean, one, you're going to have so many more opponents. Getting through, breaking through is going to be much harder. And I believe the base of the Democratic Party, much like the base of the Republican Party a few years ago, is so hungry to win. And they want Trump beat at whatever cost is required. And is nice talk and platitudes going to work in this election? I don't think so. Not in this primary. I don't think so.
I would disagree because it works because if they believe that he's the most electable candidate in the general election. So, and that's what I think we're seeing from a lot of polling, that folks are willing to sort of disagree with the nominee if they believe he can beat Trump.
I am curious. Let me ask you one. Let me put up, guys, and it was a quote we had for the last segment, but I want to put up that Chris Hayes interview with Beto, if you're listening to me in the control room. Let me play that quick soundbite, because I'm curious what you think of this, Doug. All right, we're gonna get a second, because I want to get this out of here, because you talk about electability. Yeah. Does the issue, do you want to nominate somebody that actually entices Trump to make immigration the be-all, end-all? In his interview with Chris Hayes, for instance, he basically said he'd tear down the walls that are there. Well, wait a minute. There are people that said they don't want new walls, but they actually kind of like the old walls.
If you believe that the strength of Donald Trump is the immigration issue, then Beto O'Rourke might be the best person to take him on. You think that might be better? Because he lives on the border. He knows about this issue inside and out. And he can talk about it in terms that people down there understand. And I think he can talk about it in terms in rural parts of this country and blue-collar parts of this country in a way that maybe other Democrats can't talk about it. So Beto might be perfectly positioned to have a fight with Trump on immigration and do it in a way that's pretty high-minded and not so ugly as the way in which Trump does it.
Let's talk about the rest of the field. Sarah brought up a good point. It's such a crowded field. There's only so much oxygen to go around. And Beto's taking up a big chunk. It feels as if there's a little bit of, I think we have this in here a little bit, there's a little bit of, I think this is really hard for a Cory Booker. I think this is really bad for an Amy Klobuchar. I think it's really hard for all of these sort of really good candidates that need a moment, that need Iowa to pop. How damaging could he be?
Well, I think we're going to have a not necessarily a winnowing moment, but a reality check moment in April 15th when we get the first quarter fundraising.
That'll be the first reality check.
Yes, and debates after that. Remember the financial part of it. He raised $79 million in 2018, twice as much as any Democratic Senate candidate. In October of 2018, he raised $38 million. That's more than Bernie Sanders raised in any quarter of 2015.
By the way, I think it's very likely that tomorrow on this show, we're reporting that Beto O'Rourke might have raised $10 million in 24 hours.
Well, that will be very
There's
telling.
a reality check right there.
That will be very
I remember
telling.
your campaign in 2000, when in 1999, at that time, and George W. Bush, boy, is he going to raise 10 million, 11 million? And it was like 25 or something,
23,
30.
I think, or
and it
maybe
was like, blew the
And that's what happened with Obama.
Yeah.
Remember,
but here's where what Beto O'Rourke also has going for him is Texas. The Texas primary will be a counter to the California primary on the same day. And so if he can survive, he could be in this for a very long time.
And Texas still, I think, has that kabuki theater way that they decide delegates so he can win it twice. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there.
Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.